Hi guys, I'm joined here today by the man himself. It's the Cobra, it's Carl Froch. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
All right, wonderful. We understand that your mum is from Newcastle. So with this in mind, does this give you some sort of affiliation with the North East?
I suppose it has to, doesn't it? My mum was born in Blythe, Northumberland, I believe it is, Newcastle. And she moved down when she was very young. She was still a baby at 3-4 years old. She moved down to the Midlands. So in terms of my connection with Newcastle, it begins and ends there. You know, I wasn't even thought about when my mum left Newcastle. But I've still got family here, so yeah, I've got roots coming from Newcastle, so there's the link.
Always good to have roots in Newcastle, I find. Obviously for lots of people nowadays, you're sort of their boxing hero. Who was your boxing hero growing up?
I think initially Mike Tyson jumps to mind because, you know, what an ultimate fighting machine he was. And he tore the rule book and threw it out the window because he's 5'10", and all the heavyweight champions were 6 foot plus, 6'6", and you know, big monsters. And Mike Tyson came in at that height, 5'10". He was such a fighting machine, such an animal in the ring. Tenacious, strong, had a jaw of steel like myself. You know, he could take a punch, and he had that fighting mentality. So he was, you know, if I'm going to say anyone was my boxing hero, it has to be Mike Tyson. But I spent a lot of time watching Nassim Hamed come through because he was so entertaining, and Chris Eubank, the affluence that he brings into the ring was always good to watch. I always liked the entertaining fighters, but Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran, Thomas Hearns, and you know, from that era in the 70s and 80s, I think everybody's seen them. If you're into boxing, then you know Sugar Ray Leonard and them fighters, you have to have seen them and you have to have loved and enjoyed them. But I'm a big fan of Roy Jones Jr. as well. I mean, there's a couple of big names that stand out, but the top of all of them is Mike Tyson.
Absolutely, Mike Tyson was probably one of my favourite boxers as well. So obviously, I don't know who wouldn't know about the Froch Groves fight. Would you say that filling Wembley was the pinnacle of your career, like one of the highlights of your career, or do you think there was something else, or maybe even something to come that could maybe be the highlight of your career?
Potentially there's something to come. I mean, if I can get a fight in Las Vegas, which I've boxed in America a few times, but I was in Atlantic City and Connecticut. But to fight in Las Vegas, the fight capital of the world, with your name up in lights, I think it's every fighter's dream. But to fill the National Stadium, Wembley Stadium in London, in my last fight, there's going to be no platform bigger than that, even Las Vegas. So it's just an unbelievable accolade for me to be able to say that I've achieved in my career, because not many sports stars in any sport, cricket, football, tennis, can say that they've had their defining moment. And I've had that with my fight against George Groves at the Wembley Stadium, because it put me on such a platform and crossed over to a non-boxing audience. You know, I'm proud of that, and I could happily retire knowing that the last right hand that landed was the one on his chin. You know what I mean? So, you know, there's not really much left for me to do. And people asking about James DeGale and, you know, Chavez Jr., but the fight for me would be Chavez Jr. in Las Vegas, because for me it ticks a box, and that will get me out of bed in the morning through the winter and motivate me to bring the best out of myself. What I don't want to do is fight somebody who I'm not motivated to fight and not really up for, and turn up half-cocked like I've done a couple of times early on in my career, and struggle against a guy like Dale Westerman, a guy who struggled defending my Commonwealth title, who was brought in really as cannon fodder for a warm-up fight for Brian McGee. And I ended up tearing my bicep and nearly getting beat. I stopped the guy in 9 rounds. I had one bloody arm from round 2. But that's what happens when you're not motivated. Your body's not tough, your mind's not switched on, and it can all go wrong. So for me, for my next fight, it needs to be something big, because I've reached the top of that crest now, the top of the mountain, and anything now could be going over the other side. And I'm 37 as well. I mean, I'm not 47, but I'm not in my 20s, so I need to be careful what I do. So my next fight's going to be a very educated decision from myself, my coach Rob McCracken, and my promoter Eddie Hearn. So we need to think wisely about it, but ultimately the decision lies with me. And if the right fight doesn't come along, I'll probably hang the gloves up and retire a very happy man.
What do you think of boxing in the North East and kind of shining stars coming through the North East?
Well, we've got Luke Campbell, the Olympic gold medalist from Hull, and I'm very good friends with him. I've been training with him for the last probably 4 years, might even be 5 years since I've been training at the IS in Sheffield. And if I go back to when I used to box for England and we trained at the Crystal Palace, we had David Dolan, who's not a bad heavyweight. I think he's done okay as a heavyweight. I think he won a British title. He's had a couple of losses. I can remember I went to Canada with the pair of them and boxed in an international tournament. But other than that, I've trained up in Durham And I know the Dolan brothers, and you'd have heard of Glenn McCrory. He works for Sky. He was a world champ one day. I think he lost though to a body shot in his first defence, which ain't good. I'm just having a go at Glenn there, really. I like Glenn. He's a good friend of mine. But other than that, mate, that's it. That's about my link with Newcastle.
So, if you were to give any advice to anybody looking to be a champion like yourself, looking to do a big event like Wembley, what advice would you give them?
Don't smoke weed. It's no good for you. There's too many young kids smoking weed these days. Loads of people growing it, smoking it. One advice: don't smoke it. Just don't do it.
Straightforward to the point. No, is that it? No.
So much advice I could give kids coming through. It's all about training hard, applying yourself, dedicating yourself, being committed, sacrificing so many different things, you know. But my advice is don't smoke weed. There you go.
Obviously, you said before you retire you want to fight in Vegas. Have you ever thought about fighting in Newcastle?
Instead of Vegas? What do you think? What's your biggest venue up here? St James's Park, and that'd hold a fair few, wouldn't it? Yeah. So if the right fight happened and we could get the right opponent and you know, I'm sure we'd fill that place with the right opponent. So I've got nothing against coming up to Newcastle and fighting it at the park, definitely. But realistically, is it going to happen? You need to speak to Eddie Hearn, my promoter.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Carl.
Pleasure.
And I'll see you around.